Welcome back to another episode of Technology for Independence with Christopher Cooley. Today, Christopher is going to be talking with Dan Fisher about post-traumatic stress disorder. So stay tuned. Welcome back to another episode of Technology for Independence with Christopher Cooley. Today, Christopher is going to be talking with Dan Fisher, and the subject matter is going to be post-traumatic stress disorder. Chris, always a pleasure talking with you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Patrick. I thought it would be great to have Dan to come on and talk about PTSD and how it affects him and what helps him and what doesn't help him. A lot of Americans today had PTSD and struggling and don't know how to cope with it. And so hoping that this interview will help individuals to have tips to be able to manage their PTSD. Dan, why don't you come and tell us about yourself and a little bit about, your PTSD and how you cope with it?
Sure. Well, I live here in Columbus, Ohio, and I work as a sales recruiter. I work in healthcare staffing, and obviously technology plays a big role as far as what I do, as far as helping healthcare workers get to hospitals that need them. My PTSD is actually a mix between complex PTSD as well as general PTSD. A lot of it stems from childhood abuse, but also just different traumatic events that I experienced while in the military and then in my young adult life. So my PTSD, and I think everybody's PTSD story is kind of unique to them, but mine is kind of a combination of several different traumatic events that I've gone through. I just started using a service dog for PTSD about 6 years ago. And between the technology that's available for us and the use of service dogs, and as well as just a general more understanding of PTSD and mental health and the research that goes into that, I would say there's a lot of ways that I'm able to cope with that. With the technology that's available now, the service dog that I have, I'm able to continue living on my own. I'm able to continue pursuing my career in healthcare staffing. And I'm excited to be here today to just kind of talk with you all about, what has worked for me. And, if we can think of maybe things that haven't been as helpful as well.
The only thing that many of us who don't have PTSD, we see on TV. And we see individuals having flashbacks and things of that nature. Can you tell me more about what really happens with a patient that has PTSD?
Sure. So a lot of it is just intrusive thoughts. And them thoughts could be triggered by, for me, it's sudden loud sounds. Or if I'm approached pretty quickly from a stranger from behind, your body goes into that flight or fight response. And obviously in your mind, you're thinking does it make sense that I feel this way in response to whatever just happened? But then you immediately get back to the emotions that you experienced when you was going through past trauma. And it also kind of makes you a little bit hypervigilant, and that, especially if it's repeated trauma that you've gone through for people with complex PTSD, that you make assumptions that, because this is what has happened every time I've been in this situation, this is the next time that it's going to happen. So as far as what you see in the movies, as far as the visual part, mine is not necessarily a physically visual memory that I see, but it is a memory that instantly I just stop dead in my tracks, and it feels like I'm right back there in that moment and going through maybe the 3-second response to that initial trauma response. So it's about, my heart rate will rise rapidly, or sometimes it's ruminating and replaying conversations from the past and not sure why you're stuck on that thought, other than something in your present kind of triggered you into getting back in that mindset and really struggling of coming out of that. And that's where my service dog comes into play to help me out quite a bit, is by providing them nudges and distractions, things like that. And it's almost, I think a lot of people describe it as divided attention. You're here in the present and you know what's going on and you're not a danger, to what's going on around you. But then there's the other half of you, your other self, that is constantly thinking back to those things. I think movies and Hollywood does a great job in helping people understand like that it can happen just in an instant where you have that flashback, but it's not necessarily where you're physically viewing it or you're having like a hallucination visually, but it is something that is intrusive in your mind and you just can't shake it out of your mind as quickly as someone without PTSD.
Now, it's my understanding you were in the military, and some of the experiences that you had has led to the PTSD. Would you care to share a little bit about what those circumstances were?
Some of it is, personal information I keep to myself, but in general terms, when you're in a military environment and everything is militant, there's a strong discipline and a strong structure. For me, coming from having that abusive childhood and then going into such a structured, regimented plan with the U.S. Army, it just isn't a good fit until you peeled and moved on from the trauma from complex PTSD. So then, of course, you have different social inadequacies that are absolutely crucial to your success as a soldier. So for me, a lot of the issues that I had in the military was going through traumatic combat simulations, things like that, not knowing how that was going to be an adverse response to the trauma that I had already gone through previously. So for me, my PTSD from the military, I know a lot of veterans, particularly from like a combat situation or something like that. Mine was more impacted because there's already an existing mental health issue, and then trying to adapt to the regiment and the routines of the U.S. Army, just it wasn't compatible with my existing conditions until I was able to cope with those first.
So you're indicating that prior to the military, you had also PTSD.
Right. It was undiagnosed at that time. And gosh, we're talking about, the late 90s. And at that time, PTSD had just became a word added to the dictionary. So we didn't quite understand very much about it at all. So obviously, the Army wasn't in a position at that point to kind of provide support or even to put a label on it. But now I feel like, for newer soldiers going through basic and pursuing their career, the fact that it's known, we know what it is, we know how to cope with it. It's no longer a limiter of keeping you successful in the military or for, a lot of different career paths. And that just comes from the advancement of technology, our deepening understanding of PTSD, and knowing more about the coping strategies that you can employ so you can still be independent and successful with PTSD.
What kind of tip do you have that helps you? If it be headphones, music, and your service dog you said you had, on what helped you?
Yes, absolutely. So first, I'm a man of faith. And for me, my faith has helped me cope a lot with PTSD. Spending time, in mindfulness or meditation, especially when you're at them angry agitation moments, taking time to maybe put on some music and go meditate, even if it's for 10 or 15 minutes, will sometimes help reset my flight or fight responses. The other thing that really helps, whether it's my, working in the office, or if it's, just my personal relationships with my friends and family at church or wherever, is just making those around you aware of, hey, I do have PTSD, and this is kind of my contingent crisis plan. And if I feel myself, getting to a point where it's becoming uncontrollable, and knowing what your crisis plan is. So, for example, at work, for me, what that looks like is, working with my manager that if I'm going to have a hard day, as soon as I know I'm having a hard day, vocalizing that. Hey, boss, I know I'm having a hard day today. And then if it still becomes an issue for me a couple hours later, reach out to my boss again. Hey, you know what? I need to take a longer break, or I might need to take a half a day. That gives my company, and my company is so supportive. they know my plan and they know at what point to step in and maybe get me an assistant for the day that can take over tasks that I need to do. When it comes to the personal relationships, educating my family and friends about PTSD, about what that means for me, making sure that I educate them that there is nothing that they can do to cause it. It's not something that they need to change their behaviors for or that they need to tiptoe around. But it also creates the understanding that if I'm just having a day where I need to cancel our plans last minute, my friends understand that and they're very, supportive, and they also know how to respond. I think that's a very important part of having PTSD is training people how to respond, because people are going to be uncomfortable and they are going to be awkward if they've never had that conversation before. So my friends know, like, the best response that you can give me is if I say, you know what, I'm not feeling well today and I can't carry out these plans, and say, you know what, I love you. Let's plan this another day. You let me know when you're ready, and to end the conversation and to take a break at that moment. For me, it becomes problematic when my friends want to help, or they're showing concern and they're wanting to ask about things that I'm not equipped to share with them. Maybe it's because of our relationship, or maybe it's because it's too fresh. So being able to establish that education piece with your family and friends is huge and beneficial. Having that plan before you go into trigger mode or before you go into crisis mode is helpful. And then also having the service dog, he can be a communicator for me. I deal with what they call focal onset impairment awareness seizures. So it's not epileptic, but it does kind of distract me to where I may not be responsive to people around me. Having that service dog there with, just a little thing on his tag, so someone's aware, like if they're worried, and I'm not responsive, that is quite helpful. Obviously, having a service dog, my dog's a big 125-pound boxer mix. So when I'm in a grocery store, he might be laying down behind my cart while I'm loading my groceries, keeping people from coming up behind me. Or, I'm in a mode where I can't respond, I keep emergency information on his harness so that if I need help, usually first responders, they're going to check that medical bag, and that's going to give them a lot of information on how to help as well. I think a lot of the tasks my dog was trained to do, we didn't have to keep up this training because the technology is there to help with this task. One of my big goals was being able to live independently on my own without having to have people help me with things that seem silly to need someone to help with, such as turning on the lights if I come in a room, or when someone knocks on the door, being able to communicate to them before I open that door. Different things like that can be triggering for me. At first, there were things that my dog was, trained to do, how to open the door or turn on lights with special light switches, things like that. But now, as smart technology becomes available, and we have smart bulbs that can turn on your lights 30 minutes after you wake up, or that are voice activated, or even having a smart doorbell installed in your home. So when someone rings on that, technology plays a crucial role there. As far as being able to maintain a career, having the service dog and the technology are both, for me, life changing. Being able to set up reminders on routine tasks, when you have PTSD and you're triggered and you have that divided attention going, you can quickly forget things that you've done a million times. And it's not you forget how to do them, you just forget to do them. So having your checklists in line, having reminders set up, and really taking the time to invest in all the features, especially in a business environment with Microsoft Office, whether it's your Outlook, having things organized in Word or Excel, all of those things have been instrumental to helping me continue to perform at the top of my field, and just making sure that even on my rough days, that technology can carry me through until I'm back into my clear mind again.
So if you're out and didn't have your service dog or the technology with you, and you have an episode, how would you want the public to respond if they feel like you needed help?
Just because you have a disability does not mean that you are unable to advocate for yourself. So the first thing is, if you spot someone out and you think that they might need help, ask them. And it's the same with every disability. You don't just jump in and help without being asked to or getting that permission piece. The second part, especially when it comes to PTSD or anything related to anxiety, is to honor whatever the request is. There's been times, when I was trying to get out without my service dog, and, I'll have an anxiety attack and I'll be sitting on a park bench or whatever, and people come up and offer to help. But what I really needed was to be just left alone. I was safe, I was fine, and I just needed to wait for that to pass. Where if someone well-intentioned was trying to help and not respecting the boundary that I put in there, like, hey, you know what, I'm fine, I just need to be left alone for a few minutes, that can actually make things worse. So I would say the biggest thing, if you see someone and you think they might need help, is to ask them if they need help. And if they're able to respond to you, then assume that they're telling you what they need, whether it's to be left alone or if they're saying they don't need help, honor that. But if they're unresponsive to you, I think just waiting near them, but maybe not directly in their personal comfort space, and calling 911, or here in Ohio, you can actually call 988 and talk with a licensed counselor, and they can kind of triage based off of what you're seeing and tell you if help is needed or not. For me, I am able to advocate, and I'm very articulate in advocating for myself. So most of the time, people that, they have a question like, hey, do you need help? A simple no is sufficient. I'm able to move on. I think a lot of well-intentioned people, though, the concern is this person in a right state of mind to confidently say or advocate for themselves? Being mindful that PTSD disability, it does not impair your ability to learn or to advocate for yourself. If I need help, I'm very quick to ask for it.
So if I've got to call 988, what is 988? Can you tell me a little
So
bit
in
about that?
Ohio, and I believe they're working on launching that nationwide. It is a phone number very similar to 911, but it is more about mental health issues. I think a lot of times when you see someone having a mental health crisis, you don't perceive a physical harm, so you're just kind of on the fence, like, do I call 911? Do I not? Like, something's just off, and you aren't sure because you realize right away it's not a physical harm, but there's something, a concern with mental health. 988 is your 911 number if it's nothing physically related, but there is still a mental health emergency and you're not sure how to help. Normally, they'll still send, a paramedic or an EMT to your location, but normally, and if they're going to send law enforcement officers here in Columbus, for example, usually they'll send a law enforcement officer that is specifically trained to help people having a mental health crisis. That's also a number that you can use if you yourself are dealing with mental health crisis and you're beyond the point where it's just suicidal ideations and you're at that point where you're starting to make plans and you're concerned about will you follow through with that. You call 988 to get help for that. And again, similar for 911, but it's specifically for mental health.
I think one of the misconceptions of PTSD is the fact that the movies portray that anyone that has that condition will become violent. And it does not appear that that is the case for many individuals.
That's not the case for the majority of people with PTSD. So PTSD is an issue of we all have our fight or our flight responses. And when you have PTSD, you're always hypervigilant. You're always quick to make a response of whether, it can quickly become violent. But I would say the majority of the time, at least for me and people that I use as my support system, the general response is the flight response. So what that looks like is in the middle of an argument, we're quick to walk away. You know what? I'm done with you. I'm walking away. Or quick to end and terminate relationships versus getting violent. PTSD is often a comorbid, what they call comorbidity with other mental health and psychiatric illnesses. By and large, in my experience, people that are becoming violent due to mental health concern, it's not due to PTSD alone. Usually there's other psychiatric illnesses such as bipolar or schizophrenia that is triggering that violent response. Majority of the time, especially for me, it's the flight response. When, if it's conflict or an argument, I need to be able to walk away and revisit that later. And that's also something I had to educate my family on, was how do we handle conflicts? Handling those conflicts, sometimes you need a space to vent, or you just need to put a pause in that conflict and revisit it when you're in a better state. My company's been really great about that as well. And just having that up front, you know what, if this gets overwhelming for me, I'm going to ask us to take a break, take 30 minutes, and then we'll come back to the conversation if it's at all possible. And if it's family and friends, you might even be able to put more of a space in there. Having that plan up front helps you manage those conflicts. For me, it's a flight response. For most people with PTSD, instead of becoming violent, it's going to be the flight response. At the same time, there is a sense of confrontation that comes from having PTSD. And so I think, especially in complex situations, we become very angry, we become very irritable, confrontational, and argumentative. And it makes people feel like that this is going to escalate to violence. But the majority of the time, before it gets to that point, your flight response kicks in. So it looks like you're arguing with someone, you're yelling and screaming, then the next second you're just completely done with the conversation and you're walking away or running away or avoiding them altogether. Very seldom does it become violent because of PTSD.
Wisdom you wish to share to the viewing audience.
Whatever your faith background is, understanding the mindfulness aspect of it. If you're not a person of faith, mindfulness can be very helpful. For me, that's prayer and meditation and music. But having your response for joy, for me, it can easily become overwhelming. Where everything I think about or focus on is about past traumatic events, or if I'm in a new conflict, I hyper focus in on that new conflict, and then you forget to enjoy life. And you forget, and that's where the depression creeps in, and that's where other issues keep coming in, and you forget what it means to enjoy life. So for me, what it means to enjoy life is being at my piano, playing music, or singing. Me enjoying life is spending time with my kids, or taking a hike or walk in the park. And even though it doesn't feel fun in the moment, knowing before the times come up what joy looks like for you. And even if you're not feeling the emotion of joy while doing those things, always having a plan of when you're going to be revisiting those things that bring you joy. Getting that helps me get unstuck when I'm dealing with depression, or if I'm in several stressful situations. I work in sales. There's always going to be those times where there's going to be the stress in my job, but knowing when I'm going to get back to my happy place of playing music, or getting my dog to the park, or having plans with family and friends of something that we're going to enjoy doing, making sure that you have planned joy in your life is going to be huge in helping you cope with PTSD. Educating yourself about PTSD, because without having a label on it, without knowing what those things look like, it's a scary thing. Anything is scary until you know what it is. Educating yourself, having intentional acts of joy planned for your life, and if you're a man of faith, prayer and meditation, and just really relying on your faith to carry you through those moments help.
I hear you talk about church a lot. What would be one of the encouragement moments if maybe someone that doesn't go to church or doesn't feel comfortable in a church setting? Somebody gets triggered a lot at church for some reason. They don't feel comfortable going to church. What would be one tip that you would give that individual to be able to cope with life without having to go to church?
And I think a lot of people with PTSD, we tend to isolate a lot. And you see that, even in religious communities and in church communities. So I think that, again, with all of your relationships in life, whether it is your business and professional relationships, your family, your friends, or even your church family, educating them that PTSD is something that you deal with, and educating them about what your plans are on how to cope with that. For me, I don't get to make it to church every single Sunday, but I'm still very close to my church family. That I'm able to maintain that relationship with people in my church is by being honest. You know what, I'm just not having a great Sunday, or I'm having a difficult time today. I'll try to make it next week. And setting up that expectation kind of liberates me to give me a free pass on Sundays that I can't make it, but making sure that I am staying connected to my faith throughout the week. And that looks like reaching out to, the pastors in my church or to other people within my church outside of church and just, maybe having a quick conversation about how things went at service. Having a plan on, for me, it's about reading my Bible quite frequently and having times of praise and worship in my own personal life and realizing that church is only one part of that equation. Be transparent and honest with the church community you're part of, but giving yourself grace that reality is with PTSD, you might not ever be in a point where you can make it there every single Sunday. And just having that understanding from your church community.
Hey, we're talking with Dan Fisher, Technology for Independence with Chris Cooley. Really appreciate his sharing knowledge about the post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you, Dan, for coming in and talking about your struggles and what helps you along with your PTSD.
Yeah, it was great to be here, and I was glad to share, Chris. I've known you for a long time, and I've always admired the work that you did. So to be able to contribute to that a little bit, I was excited to have the opportunity, so thank you.